Ukrainian forces remain on the back foot as Russian assaults enter three different settlements. Fighting has now broken out into the areas of Novomihailovka, which is on the far southern sector near Marinka, and the towns of Klishivka and Bogdanovka, which are in the Bakhmut sector. In addition, the Russian army is eroding the Ukrainian offensive gains in Robotny, Krinky, and Gorlovka. This is the December 20th Frontline Report. Let's jump into the details of the battlefield as well as some public statements made by both Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Before we move on, don't forget to like and subscribe as it is a huge help to the channel. Thanks to those of you who have been supporting the channel through the links in the description. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Ground News, where you can get 40% off using my link, which is in the description. Also, check out my X and Telegram pages to keep track of some of the source material I use, as well as engage in debate about the war. Before we get into the biggest updates, I am going to go through some previous changes that did not make it into my last video. First of all, up here in the area of Kupiansk, the Russians had made an advance into the first houses of Sinkivka. If you remember, I said I wasn't going to do updates on this until we had footage that we could geolocate. That has now come out. The Ukrainians have destroyed some Russian equipment in this first grouping of houses here. Some of the claims state that after the Russian assault, the Ukrainians managed to push them back out, but we do not have any geolocation of that. So as for now, this is going to be where we have the front lines in this sector. Now moving on to the Bakhmut sector, further to the south, we've seen some large Russian gains in the area of Bogdanovka. Initially, Russian forces advanced south down this rail line here, which is actually kind of at the crest of the hill, or it's sort of a plateau that overlooks Bakhmut. So this is prime real estate in this territory here. Securing this flank allowed the Russians to move into the town of Bogdanovka itself. And let's go ahead and get our labels and roads on here so we can see. About 10% of the territory of the town was captured. Some residential housing, a couple farming warehouses, barns, and things like that. So definitely a Russian foothold into the town coming from the southern direction. Now, also advancing down that rail line allowed the Russians to bite off a sizable chunk of territory on the top of the plateau. A keynote spot here to look at is this structure in the center of the map. This is a cemetery right here. There was previously some footage of this location being used by Ukrainian troops back in the early months of the year. They were using this spot to evacuate wounded, to move ammunition and reinforcements up to the front line, which at the time was at this intersection right here. So you can kind of see how far Russian lines have advanced past their original deepest gains into Ukrainian territory. If this continues, what's going to happen is this entire area is going to be collapsed and put in under Russian control. The Russians are going to have the high ground here. Some of these forests are going to be used by the Ukrainians to hold the defense, specifically these areas right here. If you can see them on the map, these forested areas are going to become really important, but the Russians are going to be looking down on these locations, so they're probably going to take some pretty heavy direct fire. I can't imagine these will be as easy to hold on to as other forested areas, and Ukrainian defense is going to have to move further back into these commie blocks in this forested area right here, which is, I believe, within the borders of Chasiv Yar. So Russians rapidly approaching Chasiv Yar from the north there. For as far as Ivanovka goes, from the south, the Russians managed to move up the 504 road, capturing the rest of the dachas, as well as the ruins of the old Bakhmut airport, which is right here. And at first I didn't believe this was an airport, but zooming in, definitely a concrete runway here. It was probably at one point extended further one way or the other, but was dug up and destroyed to make room for farmland or something or other like that. Moving south of Bakhmut to Klashivka. This is the second town the Russians have moved into. We got a first confirmation that they've recaptured some of the houses at the far northern edge of town. Now, it seems like a lot of the mapping is claiming that the Ukrainian front line is actually somewhere in the southern part of town. So the center of Klashivka is in the gray zone, relatively, unoccupied by either side. I'm sure this is where the bulk of the fighting is going on, is within the town itself, but we can't mark it under either side's control, really. So another quick update for a place that we missed on the last video. I'll go ahead and bring up the updates from the other day. The Russians did manage to recapture the mounds that they lost in Ukraine's micro-offensive in the area of Gorlovka. So this territory has now come back under Russian control. So almost all Ukrainian gains in this small offensive have been reversed. Everything except for the trench lines in this forested area where this I guess this is an old canal or something is located. Moving on to the Avdiivka area. As per the last update, it appears the priority of this fight is lower for the Russians than Bakhmut and Marinka directions. This is likely due to the heavy fortifications. Avdiivka has transformed into a slow choke. Heavy Russian bombardments and less risky offensive actions appear to be taking place. On the northern flank, we do have a geolocation here that confirms where our front line is. Essentially, it's a video of a destroyed, they're claiming it's a destroyed Ukrainian tank. I guess I'm going to have to pull it up in the Telegram channel. It's right here. Basically, you can see from all the lines they've drawn here. It's a pretty good geolocation. Zooming in there, you see the destroyed tank. I don't think you can confirm whether that's a Russian or Ukrainian tank. Nevertheless, it does confirm the location of the front line. So, moving on to the center of town, there is also a geolocation here, which basically shows the bombardment of a Ukrainian position with an FPV drone. I'm not going to show that video, of course. I don't want to show soldiers getting killed in combat, but it does confirm relatively where the front is. If Russia has continued to advance into town, they haven't made it far. There is another video of a Russian tank column moving. The claim is from a Ukrainian source, and they're saying that the tank column is advancing on the coke plant, but I looked everywhere and I cannot geolocate it. I believe it's actually coming from pretty deep behind Russian lines, like perhaps Novoselivka Druha, or maybe even further back. But it's aerial reconnaissance from Ukraine. They're dropping a little bit of artillery on it. I believe they do damage to one vehicle, but for the most part, it doesn't look like a whole lot of artillery is reaching it or is doing the damage. On the southern parts of town, we talked yesterday about how Russia was expanding in this direction. First, they moved along the lakes in Vadian. Now they have decided to turn north towards Severne and outflank the town from the western sound, actually moving directly towards Toninke. Now, I had mentioned that I believe this to be a tactical error, unless perhaps Ukrainians' defenses are weaker than even I've been pointing out. This is, obviously the salient, this appendage is a exposed position, and if the Ukrainians start counterattacking, if they get some breathing room, they can put fire on Vadian from the north, south, and west. Now, it appears like they're starting to do that. They have launched a small counterattack, taking back some trenches and forest lines near Novelske. If they get, it seems like they're trying to get some kind of buffer zone here, and then perhaps maybe, I try to avoid predictions. Perhaps maybe we see a Ukrainian counteroffensive to retake Vadian. But, we'll see. That's speculation mainly on my part. All right, let's remove the updates from the other day now. We don't need those anymore. Looking at Novomihailovka, the Russians have started the street battle for Novomihailovka, moving into the cemetery, which we discussed yesterday. Now they've actually started moving into these warehouses at the southern edge of town, and these warehouses here directly south of town. Now this has pretty much been confirmed by all sources on all sides. This Russians are claiming these advances. Neutral sources like Syriac Maps has plotted this out, as well as Deep State UA, which is certainly a pro-Ukrainian source, showing roughly the same exact thing, along with, I believe, the Institute for Study of War. Except for the Institute for Study of War is showing that these are Russian claimed territories and they don't have confirmation of it, but nevertheless seems to be pretty much confirmed. That's the three towns: Novomihailovka, Klishivka, and Bogdanovka. So three separate urban battles going on at the moment. Four if you want to include Avdiivka itself. Okay, so real quick, Rubalny, the Ukrainian gains here are starting to erode. The Russians launched a small offensive here and recaptured another section of that first defensive line, which I believe kind of flows up through here like this. You can't see it from the mapping. It's just not on here unless, yeah, these seem to be creeks or some kind of erosion, but it cuts right directly through these fields. So, recaptured a section of that along with going a bit further and taking some more tree lines. Krinky, we actually have first mappable update for Krinky in a while. I've actually updated this to better reflect what the reality was. It appears Ukrainian forces are in this forested area here and had expanded out further, but the Russians have launched a counterattack, retaking about close to half of, it was about half of the total territory Ukraine had in Krinky, but about 40% of the town itself that Ukraine occupied. Obviously, the town extends and is much larger, so most of Krinky is under Russian control. There's rumors floating around the rumor mill here that Ukraine's planning a withdrawal. They're saying that the resources, manpower, artillery, drones, speedboats, whatever it is, the resources that they're using here can better serve the Ukrainian army on other front lines. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I don't think this is a smart action on behalf of the Ukrainians. Now, or I do believe that withdrawing from the town would be smart. Now, real quick at the end, looks like we have a tiny bit of time, trying to keep this at 15 minutes. There's some interesting statements that were made by the Russian and Ukrainian presidents. Putin, at a televised event, made some statements about Ukraine, basically taunting them, claiming, Ukraine in some kind of backwards way, or Russia was the true guarantor of Ukrainian territorial integrity, and his elaboration on that was that at the end of World War II, Stalin and the Soviet Union annexed parts of Poland, Hungary, and Romania and added them to the Ukrainian Soviet territories. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, all those countries, wanted pieces of their land back, and Russia was the only country willing to take Ukraine's side on that matter. But since the war started, that is no more, and Russia would be okay with those countries taking back pieces of their own territory. Now, the territory he's talking about is, basically somewhere in this area. I believe Rivne and Lviv. This was once Polish. This section here, further to the south of that, this bottom section of the Carpathian Mountains, south of the Yellow Line, belonged to Hungary, and then chunks of this territory, actually, it might have been near Chernivtsi, was Romanian. I'm not exactly sure which parts are Romanian, but some people are saying that this is Putin's way of kind of dangling some kind of bait, or dangling, Ukrainian territory is some kind of, I guess bait's not the word, but maybe bargaining chip with Western countries. Of course, Hungary, Poland, and Romania would not object to having territory given to them, but this is probably a non-starter for countries like the U.S., the U.K., and Germany. So, we'll see. It's a little bit far-fetched to say that's what he intended. I think Putin was really just talking some shit. And speaking of talking shit, President Zelensky also made some statements right after Putin's televised event. He made the claim that, first of all, Ukraine is going to mobilize 500,000 new soldiers this year. I'm increasingly skeptical that Ukraine will be able to do this, especially considering how many they've mobilized already. Of course, we've had several people on the podcast on the channel so far talking about Ukrainian manpower and Ukrainian losses and how Ukraine has the numbers to keep fighting. I'm still iffy on it, but one point in 2022 they claimed to have 1 million men at arms, and that was before the counteroffensive troops were mobilized for the 2023 campaign. So in a way, it raises more questions about how many losses they've taken, just how many soldiers are currently active. The next statement, definitely shooting back at Vladimir Putin, was that Russia had failed in all of their goals this year and had achieved nothing. I'm not exactly sure what the Russian goals were. My understanding is that President Putin, in interviews earlier this year, said the plan was mainly to fend off the Ukrainian offensive, so just to focus on defense for the year. I'm unaware of any major offensive goals that were stated outside of capturing Bakhmut. The final statement was that Ukraine would produce 1 million drones next year. What type of drones, I'm not exactly sure. I'm assuming FPV and quadcopters, but I will have to do more research to see how possible that is and what kind of economy of scale would be needed. Alright guys, that is all from me today. Don't forget to check out the links in the description to support the channel. Give us a like and subscribe, and follow us on Telegram and X. Thanks again, and until next time.